computer, and I'll just put my slides up. And yeah, so we're going to talk about mindfulness today. And yeah, we're zooming through this pretty quickly. And I just so that you're aware, last time we met, we were talking about stress, and I gave a number of different strategies around how you can deal with stress. But the bottom line was, and I know it sounds a little bit, well, it sounds, stress is really manufactured in the mind. The argument is that we create the stress in our heads. And of course, it means different things to different people. And basically, what challenges some people may not stress other people. So it's a very much an individual thing. And we talked about some ways of just reducing it by 10% or something like that. So today's a little bit more of the same. It's more around the whole concept of mindfulness, which of course has taken up a life of its own over the last 10 years. So I want to talk a bit about that. And of course, I'll make it as participatory as I can. So I'll talk about what mindfulness is. I'll talk about the actual practice of it and what some things that you can do. And I guess the point out of all of this is that it's really about being aware. You can't stop yourself from, we all drift off every now and again, but you can't stop that. But the point is to be aware that you're drifting off, and then you've got a choice about whether you bring yourself back or not. So the studies show that probably about 40% of the time, you and I are what we might call mindless. In other words, we're either thinking about the future or we're thinking about the past. In other words, we're not in the present moment. And that's not ideal, obviously, because often when we're thinking of the future or we're thinking of the past, it's usually either worrying about what we said or did, or worrying about what we might say and do in the future. And of course, we're missing the conversation we're in at the time, or we're missing what we're actually doing at the time. So the idea is to try as hard as we can to actually increase our capacity to be mindful. That's the idea. And that gives us resilience. So if I just define what it is, and then I'll define what it isn't, and then we can have a bit of a chat about it. So mindfulness is focus and attention, being in the here and now. Basically, it's, we're in the present moment. When you're having a conversation with someone and you can see that they're obviously they're not attentive, they're not there, they're off somewhere else. They think that they're faking it, I suppose, but we all know that they're off somewhere else, and that happens quite a lot. So when we're having a conversation with someone who is completely mindful, it makes a huge difference in terms of our level of engagement in the conversation. So it's basically directed attention. And there's two types of attention that come into play here. It's the attention on externally on, what's happening around us. And it's also attention internally around what we're thinking or how we might be processing that particular event. So it's also about thoughts and emotions, in other words. And so I would encourage you to become an observer of your inner state if possible, because if you don't know that you're mindless, then there's nothing you can do about it. If you do know you're mindless, at least you're in a position then when you can choose to do something. Sometimes you just might not want to be mindful, but at least you've got that choice. And that reduces stress levels, it increases resilience, it does a lot of really good things for us. And what it isn't, and this is important, it's not all about being calm, because sometimes when we're in the moment, it's not really a calm moment to be in. So it's more about being in the moment rather than being calm. It's not about an absence of thought either, because, our brain never switches off. And, as you know, when you meditate, you can't stop those thoughts coming in, but you can at least recognize them coming in. It's not about being complacent either, about just letting someone say or do or whatever they want. It's not about that. It's certainly not a religion. Some religions, such as Buddhism, do adopt the concept of mindfulness, but it's not a religion per se, and it's certainly not a silver bullet. It's just one of the many sort of things that I'm going to talk to you about in the Lunch and Learn series. So it's just another tactic. It's another way of being able to deal with things as they are. Okay, so that's the definition. Now, so it's really about being attentive in the here and now, being completely in the moment. And I think probably in a very practical sense, a good idea would be to really practice this. And you can do it virtually straight away. You can do it right now, for example, just concentrating on the presentation, not drifting off or going somewhere else. It's true that when we're tired or we're stressed, it's a bit hard to be mindful, but it's also a cause of that too, because if we're not mindful, we're usually worrying about other things that are going on around us. So it's all about being in the moment as much as we possibly can. I'd say to you that if you know people, as I do, who are highly charismatic, a lot of people, attribute charisma to fame or even good looks and so forth. I actually think, and there's a bit of research that's done on this, I think if you find someone that's very charismatic, I think one of the key attributes is that they're right in the moment. That's what makes them charismatic. So that might be something to think about as well, that because they're in the moment, people are tuned into them. They can sense that they're there, right there in the present. So if you're having a conversation with someone and they're completely immersed in the conversation and you intuitively know that, it's a richer experience for all of us, including, of course, the person who's mindful. So it's pretty much just being in the now. And I guess if you think about it this way too, which is interesting, that the moment's the only time we've really got, isn't it? Like, for example, if we're spending too much time thinking about the past, it's already gone. So regardless of what we might think about the past, there's nothing we can do to change it. We're not living, or shouldn't be living, in the past. A lot of people do. And of course, the future isn't here yet. So we can't really, we can certainly plan for the future, but we can't do much about it as such. So I like a little saying that I guess I came up with it, and that is plan for the future, learn from the past, and be in the present. I think that's a really good philosophy. So plan for the future. Obviously, you want to do your planning, but to do it constructively, to learn from the past. So what are the mistakes I've made? What are the things that I've learned about myself? And live in the moment. So I think if we can get to that philosophy, our life is far more engaging, far more enjoyable. We get more done. We notice more things. We're more engaged. We're more influential. There's a lot of huge benefits about being mindful. So that's just my philosophy, and that's my overview. So I'll just stop for a moment. Yeah, so that's it. That's what mindfulness is. I'll obviously go through a few strategies in a moment, but any questions about that? Sounds pretty easy, doesn't it? But when you think about 40% of people who are, or 40% of the time, we're actually mindless, it's pretty scary to think about that. So, so I guess what it is being aware of whether you're mindful or not, and then making a decision that I'm going to bring myself back to the present. And that's why meditation is so powerful, because when you're meditating, you're sitting there, and the idea is that when these thoughts come in, you recognize them coming in, and you then gently dismiss them and then come back to your breathing or whatever it is you're concentrating on. So that's why meditation is so powerful. If you said, well, what's the one big benefit? It's about the training your brain to be mindful. Because if you do that in meditation, it does create this idea that when I'm sort of not meditating and I'm in life, I can bring myself back, or you can bring yourself back to the here and now. It makes such a difference. I often say to people, if you're going to have a conversation with someone, have a conversation with them, or don't have a conversation. It's very, I obviously a lot depends on who it is and what they've got to say and all the rest of it. But, to be half there and half somewhere else, you're not doing justice to the conversation, and you're certainly not doing justice to wherever your mind is either. So it's kind of like, but unfortunately our society's taught us to multitask. Your brain actually, we make a lot of jokes about this, and they say women are better at multitasking than men, but there's no evidence at all anywhere that multitasking actually is effective, because when your brain actually wants to concentrate on one thing at a time. So for example, if you're tapping out an email and you've got somebody in your eyesight that wants to talk to you, it's very tempting to say to the other person, look, keep talking, I'm listening to you, but I've just got to finish this email at the same time. So you think you're being really effective by doing two things at once. But the truth is you're not listening to them as well as you could be, and they know that as well, which is another point. But the other side of it is you're not really producing an email of good quality, because you're half concentrating on that and half concentrating on someone else. So the idea is just to focus on one thing. So the ideal thing in that circumstance would be to say to the other person, look, I've got to finish this email. Let me finish this email. As soon as I finish this, I'll have a talk to you about it, or whatever it is you want to talk about. Or the other side of it is to say to the other person, or just close your laptop, or just turn away from the computer and give the person 100% attention. You'll get much better results by concentrating on one activity like that. So don't be hoodwinked into thinking that this notion of multitasking is it's not effective at all. I mean, there are some things, obviously, if you're exercising and you're listening to music, that's a different thing. But, in most cases, it's not relevant at all. And it just doesn't work at all. So give whatever you're doing 100% attention. There's a great book that was written by Carl Newport called Deep Work. If you like reading, it's just a brilliant read. And what he's basically saying in the book is very simple. He suggests that when you've got to write a report, or you've got to do something that requires a bit of concentration, you need to carve out a space for it. Because if you don't carve out a space, what's going to happen is you're going to do 5 minutes on the report, look at your emails, 5 minutes on the report, talk to someone about something else, 5 minutes on a report, go and get a cup of coffee. And basically that's not ideal. So his argument is, and I know working in an office is not easy, but, just going somewhere where you're less likely to be distracted, or if you've got the capacity to do this, work from home, to do those things that are what we might call deep work. So it's a great read. And he uses an interesting example. He talks about Bill Gates, and he says that Bill Gates every year goes away. I'm sure he can afford it. He's got a log cabin somewhere, beautiful location. And he just goes away for 1 week a year, takes a stack of books with him and a writing pad and pen and some Coca-Cola, which is what his thing is. And he just sits in this log cabin for a week and just thinks. And his argument is it's so well, I'm not suggesting we do this, and it'd be nice if we had the luxury to do it. But at an exaggerated level, isn't that interesting that, if someone like that feels that actually gives him an opportunity to think up new ideas or think about business or whatever. So what it means to a lesser extent, and I talked about this book earlier in the program, is a book by Adam, it'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, the book's called Third Space. And in this book, he talks about this idea that we should create little buffers between our projects. So that, for example, if you're going to a meeting, then before you go to that meeting, you spend 5 minutes just thinking, what do I want to get out of this meeting? What's the one thing that I would like to get out of this meeting more than anything else? And that makes all the difference, because what normally happens is we walk into a meeting, we're not mindful, we're still thinking about what the last meeting was all about. We're still, and by, we're 20 minutes in the meeting, we still haven't registered, and we still haven't answered the question, what are we trying to get out of this meeting? We spend our life in meetings. This is a meeting, you've got to go to another meeting after this, and it never ends. So the least we can do is be very mindful and intentional about what we're trying to get out of the meeting. Does that make sense? It's a simple thing. You just say, let's say you weren't chairing the meeting. Let's just say you're a spectator in the meeting, which in a lot of cases we are. And you might also be thinking to yourself, well, this is a waste of my time, and frankly, I don't want to be here, which is probably true. So the most constructive thing that you can do in that case, apart from sort of, politely removing yourself from the meeting if possible, the best constructive thing you can do is actually say to yourself, if there was one thing that I wanted to get out of this meeting, what would it be? So it might be a question being answered. It might be you making a statement or a comment that you feel needs to be made. It could be to understand what the next step is in the project that you're involved in, or whatever. So it's kind of like a simple little thing like that can save you huge amounts of time, because otherwise you sit there passively. Sometimes you don't feel that there's anything you can contribute, and you just basically wasted an hour of your time. But if I go in with an intent of what I want in the meeting, it's likely that when that opportunity arises, I can open my mouth and say what I want to say, and then I feel as if I've got my time worth. So that's another definition or version of mindfulness. So the key, of course, is to recognize that you're mindless, and then you can make a conscious decision about whether you want to be mindful, which is ultimately how you get back to that space. So yeah, any questions, comments about that? It sounds easy, doesn't it? But again, like everything that I've been through in this program, if you're 40% mindless, you're never going to get to zero. So just take the pressure off. But what about if you could get to 30% mindless? You'd be better off, wouldn't you? And look, this is true with children. It's true with partners. It's true with everything in life. How often have we, I don't know how many of you got kids, but how often is it a case that we're half there and we're half not? And the kids know. You think you're probably doing a couple of things at once, but in actual fact you're not. And it's not good. So being mindful is such a good life skill. I'll tell you something interesting about it too. When you're mindful, it's very hard for you to be stressed. And the reason for that is that you're completely in the moment. So you're not worrying about something that happened or worrying about something that will happen. You are completely in the zone. And if you're completely in the zone, or you can't, I mean, if you sit there and you think about something that someone said and start worrying about it, that's not actually being mindful, is it? You're actually drifting off somewhere else. But if you're completely in that moment, and I think, and I'm going to talk about this a little later, the concept of flow, being in the what they call the zone, it's an incredible feeling. Musicians, experience it, athletes experience it. I had a guy in one of my workshops the other day who was a mountain climber. I found this hard to believe, but he tells me that he's actually in that state of flow. He's completely mindful. I suppose you have to be, don't you, if you're climbing a rock face, but he's completely in the moment. And so there's some activities that can actually lend themselves very well to that. Another person told me about, he goes running, and he said, when he goes running, he's just completely in the moment. So there are activities you can do for that as well, but I'm talking about everyday activity, of course. All right, let me go back to my slides. Let's have a look at a couple of things around that and just see where we go with that. So if you're interested, and it was too long for me to play, but if you go to YouTube and you look up a person by the name of Ellen, I think it's Ellen, Ellen Langer, Langer. She's one of the world's leading authorities on mindfulness. And it's a fascinating video. It's really, really interesting, funny, and thought-provoking. But in that video, she talks about some really interesting research that she's done. And I'm going to share some of that with you. But if you're really interested to look at that a bit further, go and have a look at the YouTube video. You just have to type her name in and it'll come up. But if we think about this, this is a bit of research that you did. Now, I'm amazed by some of this, and I think you will be too. The first bullet point there, she did some research where she got some 80-year-old men. Now, I'm not quite sure why they were all men, but she didn't explain that. But she got this group of 80-year-old men, and they went through a full medical, everything, a very thorough medical, everything that you can imagine. And then what she did is she took them away on a retreat. And the retreat was set up where there was a log, some sort of a cabin or something. But these men had to live together for 5 days. But the difference was that where they were staying, they had actually turned it into a place in the I think it was the 1960s. So they had, they had some television shows of the 1960s, old-fashioned televisions. They had old furniture, old pictures on the wall, the type of food that was around at the time. Basically, they just turned the whole place into, going back in time. And so for 4 days, I think it was 4 days, they were there. They could do whatever they wanted. It didn't really matter, but obviously they indulged in some of the activities and things that were there and watched television, had some old newspapers and old magazines, or everything. Now, what was fascinating about this is when they finished, they came back on the bus and they did a medical on these elderly folk. And what they found, fascinating, they found their blood pressure had gone down, their eyesight had improved, their memory had improved. They had basically physiologically got younger in terms of what they could do. And her argument is that a lot of what happens to us in life can shape who we are. So that was one fascinating experiment. It's all there if you want to have a look at the video. Another one that she did that was really interesting is the people who were working in hotels, people that clean the rooms, she got 2 groups of people together. The ones that, the one group would just continue to do what they're doing. But once again, she did some tests on their physical condition. And so both groups were even. Now the experimental group were given a lecture on imagining that when they go into a hotel room, that they were to imagine that they were getting some exercise, so I'm cleaning the wall, imagine that I'm on this machine in the gym, and to actually imagine that they were actually getting exercise, whereas the other group weren't given that lecture. They were just told to just continue to do what they're doing. And of course, the groups were even in terms of their own age group and a lot of other attributes. And when they actually measured the group that were given the lecture about imagining that you're getting a physical workout while you do that, what was fascinating is, again, they lost weight, whereas the other group didn't. Now, they were both doing the same work, no different at all. They had healthier, all of the vital signs around health were improved. And it was because, again, there was a suggestion and people were able to change that. Now, the other experiment that she did, and I find this fascinating, when you get an eye test, when you go to the doctor and you have to read the top line, and then you read the next line and you read the next line. And what happens, of course, is that the letters get smaller and smaller and smaller. So obviously, after a while, you can't read the line. Now, what she found is that if you turn that upside down, so in other words, you start with the small line, the small writing, and move down to the larger, and then if you test people on that, what happens is that people's ability to read actually improves. I mean, their eyesight, I should say. So they can actually, because the expectation is when you go in and do those eye tests, oh, well, it's going to get easier. It's easy. Now it's going to get harder and harder and harder, and eventually it'll be impossible. So your brain's already geared in for the fact that you won't be able to read a certain line at a certain time. But if you turn that upside down, you're arguing that really that's the first line there. I probably should be able to read that. And then, it's obviously going to get easier as I go. So what they found was that people were actually, their capacity to, their eyesight or their ability to read that chart had improved significantly just by turning it upside down. So all of these things are psychological. And it just goes to show you how incredible this whole idea of being focused on the here and now and what we're doing can make a huge difference. So, and of course, there's research to show it improves relationships, it improves immunity function, well-being generally. So yeah, look, well worth it. If you get a chance to have a look at that video, please do. It's just fascinating. I just thought it'd be a waste of my time to spend 20 minutes just showing that, but I certainly think it's worthwhile having a look at if you get a chance to do that. And there's some research at the bottom there that you might want to look at as well, which at least give you some of the benefits of mindfulness. Okay. Any questions? Pretty fascinating stuff, isn't it? And this isn't just woo-hoo stuff. This is real research. And I find it fascinating that she could demonstrate clearly that our surroundings or what we're told can make this massive difference. Her argument is we get told a lot of rubbish, and because we're mindless a lot of the time, we don't ever question anything. I mean, we just accept it as conventional wisdom. For many, many years, people accepted the conventional wisdom that as you get older, you can't learn new things. That's absolutely rubbish. I mean, we now know through neuroplasticity that people's brain changes form depending on the experiences it has. It's like a muscle, and it will change. So we've got people in their 80s doing PhDs, learning new languages, but there's this myth that we've been believed for so long that, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. The reality is quite different from that, that we have believed that for so long that we've come to assume that in fact is the case, but it's not true. So yeah, we've been living in a world where we've accepted a whole lot of nonsense when it actually isn't true. So I find that fascinating as well. So, okay. Any question, anything about that was, yep, all good? Okay. So I go back and let's have a look at some things that you can do now. I don't want you to do this now, of course, but I think one of the things that can help you be mindful is you can direct your attention inward or outward. I said this before. So I mean, if you can train yourself to ask yourself these questions at different times, for example, what are you thinking about right now? You know, can you catch yourself? What are you thinking about right now? And then it's your decision, of course, about whether or not you want to continue to think that, or whether you want to be back in the activity that you should be in. So that's a good question to ask. Where are your thoughts at? What are you thinking inwardly? So inwardly, of course, is, you know, what you're churning out in your brain, but outwardly is more about the situation or the circumstances that you're in. So you can imagine what your homework's going to be now is a little bit around this idea of training yourself to occasionally ask yourself, am I in the present? Now, that's a bit confronting, that question. It's far better to ask, you know, what are you thinking about right now, which is a magic question. And it just reminds you gently that, okay, I'm thinking about something else rather than being here. And I'm choosing now to be here. So I'm deciding now not to be thinking about what I'm going to have for lunch or whatever, and bring myself back to the here and now. Because remember, the whole idea is that when we drift off, when we're mindless, we don't know that we're mindless, you see. So we just, you know, we're somewhere else, but we don't know we're somewhere else. And therefore, because we don't know we're somewhere else, we can't really do much about it. So that's why these questions are very, very powerful. I find that one of the things that I find interesting on a personal level is that when I'm having a conversation with someone, and maybe I don't really want to have that conversation with the other person, maybe I think they're a bit boring or something, I occasionally set myself the task and say to myself, I'm going to give this 100% focus. And I'm not, and by doing that, I'm not going to be mindless. And what I find, interesting enough, when I do that, I actually learn something really insightful or interesting about the other person, or something about myself even. But I set myself a little target to do that. The problem is when we are talking to someone else, for example, we are judging what they say. Okay, so when we're judging what someone else is saying, when I mean judging as in, I don't mean evaluating, we're sort of judging, you know, whether this is rubbish or whether that's right. Or so we're doing it. As soon as we start judging, we're mindless, because we're not listening to what the other person's saying. We're actually judging them. And when we're judging them, we're not being mindful, if that makes sense. So it's almost like you've got to detach yourself from the judgment and just concentrate on the other person, or whatever it is, or wherever you are. You know, it's easier said than done. And of course, when we're tired, it's very hard to do that. So obviously, you know, that's why I think, you know, the best time to have meetings are in the morning and all the rest of it, because I think we're just much fresher and much more able to be mindful in those sort of circumstances. So the judging part is interesting. What about some of these things? Surely, I'm sure I do, and I'm sure you do. Do you get lost in endless thinking? How much of your day are you worried and anxious? Do you keep thinking about something that went wrong over and over again? Just pick up on that third one, which I think is really important. One of the things that I think I did talk to you about this. It's really worth doing. It's one of the most powerful things that I do, and it doesn't take very long. On my iPhone, I write down 3 things that went well during the day, every day. And those things could be anything. They don't need to be Nobel Peace Prize or anything. It could be just that I had a really nice conversation with a friend on the phone. Or it could be that I read something interesting in an article. It could be literally that simple. But what I do is I force myself every day to write 3 things that I got out of the day that are positive. Now, sometimes, some days it's really hard to come up with 3 things, to be honest with you. And other days, there's so many things to write down. But the point is, I hold myself to a standard of 3 things a day. Now, what does this do? Well, what it does firstly is it gets us mindful of the things that are actually going well at work and life generally. So in other words, we change our focus. And what it means, you know what it's like when you come home from work sometimes, if you had a bad confrontation with someone or something didn't go well, we usually ruminate about that for a long time, and we just completely forget all the good things that went on during the day. Now that, by doing this exercise, you're getting the balance right, or somewhat right, as in you're reminding yourself there were some positive things that happened during the day. So at the end of every single week, I have 21 positive things that have happened every week. And, that doesn't, that's not going to completely alter my whole life. But what it does is it reminds me to be mindful of the things that are going well. I talk to a lot of managers about starting their meetings off with a win for the week. And I find it's really interesting that when you have a meeting, when you hold a meeting, and you ask people to tell them one positive thing that went on during the week, you'll find that most people will struggle. They can't think of anything. And the reason for that is their brain is wired, or they've wired their brain at least, to thinking about all the negative things that went on during the week. They can't think of the positive things. There's an organization that I'm consulting to now who does this right throughout their whole organization, from the senior management team. There are 345 people in the company, from senior managers right through to shop floor. Everybody who attends any meeting is expected to come up with a win for the week at every meeting. That has done wonders for the morale of the business. It's made a massive difference in terms of improving everything. Now you have to, if you did that for one meeting, there would be a struggle. If you did it for 2 meetings, it gets better. And then if you did it for the 3rd meeting, everybody turns up with something. And then if you stop doing it on the 4th meeting, everyone gets upset with you, because where's this win for the week? Because they're all ready to come along with their bragging rights about what they did, what happened during the week. So we're going to concentrate on the negatives in the meeting. So why don't we just come up with some positive stuff to start with? And that makes a massive difference in terms of the morale, and it creates what we might call an upward spiral of positivity. So you might want to try that and see how you go. I do remember I had one person in that organization come up to me at lunch. I was just there in the cafeteria, and they came up to me and they said, "I don't like this win for the week." And I said, "What?" That they weren't a manager, they're just somebody who attended these meetings. And they said, "I don't like this win for the week." And I said, "Why not?" And she said to me, "Look, nothing good happens in my life. That's why I don't like it." I found it really hard to know how to handle that. But that I would suggest, I didn't say this to her, but I would suggest to her, if I had a little longer to talk to her about it, that's all the more reason that she should be thinking of the positive things that have happened, because obviously she's so wired towards the negative that she doesn't even recognize the good things that are happening in her life, day to day, moment by moment, project by project, situation by situation. So I found that really quite insightful. So it's not so much that she hates that, it's just that she hasn't got her head around the idea that there are obviously positive things that go on in her life as well as negative things. Because it's impossible to say that it's all bad all the time, surely. So there's something to try out. Another thing you might like to try out is if somebody comes to you, I think just generally, they're negative about something, try this. You just ask them and just say, is there anything that you can do about this? Great question. Is there anything you can do about this? Now, there's only 3 answers, yes, no, or I don't know. So if they say to you, no, there's not, then you can say to them, well, let it go. Just let it go, because there's no point in worrying about something you can't do anything about. If, of course, they say yes, you can then say, okay, what is it? Then you're into sort of something far more positive and how they can fix it or whatever. And of course, if they say to you, I don't know, then you're in a great position to actually talk to them about it and say, well, let's talk about it and just see if there is something that you can do about it. So, because otherwise, you go to these workshops and you think you're supposed to sit there and listen to someone whinging for 45 minutes. The irony is it doesn't necessarily make them feel any better. And quite honestly, you've just wasted 90 minutes, you haven't wasted 45 minutes, you've wasted 90, because not only have you wasted 45 minutes of your time by listening to something where there was no real conclusion, you've also wasted 45 minutes of time that you could have been spent doing something else. So it's really another way of looking at it, I think. So question 4, do you lie awake at night thinking about your problems? The suggestion is that if you have 2 sleepless nights a month, that's acceptable. If you looked at the broad population, 2 nights is quite acceptable. If it's more than 2 nights, then, it's a little bit more of an issue. So you might want to think about that one. Are you constantly thinking about things that you need to do or get done? Of course, that's usually a worry. Am I going to be able to get it done on time? Am I going to be able to fit all these priorities in the short amount of time that I've got? So all of those things are mindless, because obviously, it's not helping. But then again, if I sat down with a pen and a paper and I did up a to-do list and I worked out what was important, least important, and then I got on and did the first one on my list, well, obviously that's being mindful. And I think we just got to accept the fact that our mind is never truly switched off. Even when we're asleep, we're dreaming. Sometimes we remember our dreams, sometimes we don't. So our mind never actually completely switches off. So the least we can do is, wherever we can, is to practice that mindfulness as such. So there we are. Any questions or comments at this stage?
You're getting a lot of silence.
Sorry?
You're getting a lot of silence, though.
Yeah, well,
maybe we're not listening well enough.
No, that's all right, Hattie. I just don't want to be boring and raving on for an hour if people have got stuff they want to say. But if you guys are okay with it, I'll just keep going. But yeah, but by all means, just raise anything that you might want to talk about. But I think this is just, as I've said to you, this is just another strategy. And I think what you've got to do is realize that this is not the be all and end all of everything. But surely it makes sense to all of us that if we're not in the moment, we're missing the moment. And if we're missing the moment, we're missing part of our life. So think about this for a minute. If 40% of our time we're mindless, that means that 40% of our life we're off somewhere else. Think about that for a minute. Incredible. 40% of the time we are off somewhere else and not where we are. That's a huge waste of time, because usually those thoughts are not necessarily constructive. Those thoughts are normally negative. Those thoughts are normally worrisome. So therefore, you can see why I'm suggesting if you can go from 40% to 30%, you've made significant difference in your own life. So that's what I'm getting at there. We all are mindless at certain times, and sometimes we're quite happy to be, but at least recognize when it's happening. That's my point. So a few things about thoughts and emotions, and I think these are important points I just wanted to cover off while we're talking about this. Thoughts of what we believe about a situation that causes us to feel a certain way. So it's possible to step back and not evaluate something or critique it or judge it. It is what it, I love that saying, it is what it is. In many ways, it's a very liberating sort of saying, because what it's really getting at is don't judge it. It is just the way it is. I mean, COVID is what it is, Sure, we'd like it to go away and we're hoping there's light at the end of the tunnel and all that sort of stuff. But it is what it is. And frankly, there's not much we can do about it. So, just simple things like that. Thoughts are fleeting, so they pop in, they pop out. Sometimes we ruminate on them, but they just jump in and jump out. Emotions may come when we practice mindfulness, and that's okay. When you think about something, what happens is this: your thoughts precede an emotion. So I might think that someone is being extremely unfair to me, and I hold a value of fairness and equity, and someone has actually done the wrong thing by me. Because I think that that person has done the wrong thing by me, what happens is then I start getting upset. So the emotion of being upset hasn't just popped into my head. It's because I've made a judgment about how or what someone's done. And because that judgment has been made, the emotion comes from that. It's the same with joyful emotions. If I'm feeling really happy, it's probably going to put a smile on my face. But it's the thought that precedes the emotion. So I think that's important. So basically what that means in reality is if we can control our thoughts a little more than we currently do, we can improve the quality of our life no end. So remember not to judge the feeling. So the moment you start judging, you get a double whammy around that, because when you start thinking about something, so let's go back to my example about the negative. Let's say I think someone's done something that I think is completely unfair. And I think it's unfair, so I get angry. And so what I do is I churn it around in my head thinking, why did they do this? Why were they so selfish? Why were they this? Why were they that? After a while, I'm actually creating a downward spiral of negativity, because these thoughts are feeding off each other to a point where I'm in a very difficult space. And as you know, when you feel like that, and we all do, it's hard all of a sudden to just let it go. So it gains a momentum, if you like, all of its own. And then, of course, what happens is that we end up worrying about things that perhaps might not have been worth worrying about in the first place. So thoughts are the key. If we can just stop judging, we may be in a position where we can just accept things as they are. One of the things that you might like to do, a little exercise, and we're not going to do it now, but one of the things I think is really powerful is, instead of going and getting an app on meditation or whatever, is just sit in a chair And if you're having trouble with meditation, I know some of you are, just sit in a chair for 5 minutes. Everyone can find 5 minutes. And close your eyes, relax your body, and just sit there and notice your thoughts. In other words, this isn't about blocking out thoughts. This is a different form of meditation. So what I'm going to do for 5 minutes is I'm just going to observe my thoughts for 5 minutes. And notice what's happening. It's really, really interesting because there's two forms of meditation, two schools. One school is to try to gently push away the thoughts to teach us to be mindful. But the other school of thought teaches us to be mindful too, where we sit there and we actually observe our thoughts. Don't judge them, just observe them. And then when they come up in your head, you go, "Ah, that's interesting." You don't say any more, you don't think anymore, and just see what else comes up. If you find you start worrying or thinking about something further, you will notice yourself doing that. And it gives you a wonderful, wonderful insight into your brain, how you operate. So there you are, 5 minutes a day is a wonderful thing to do. That's meditation. You don't have to sit there and think of nothing. It's actually good to recognize what you're thinking about sometimes. It can be a really good exercise as well. So try that. Okay, I might leave that. Attention, focus there. Yeah. Might leave that too. Yeah, look, I don't know. When I first read this book, Eckhart Tolle, I've forgotten the name of the book. Anyway, it's quite a heavy read. I didn't get much out of it, frankly. And then I read it a second time. I wasn't ready the first time, obviously, but what he says is explain the power of regularly paying attention to our breathing. One of the techniques you can use, if you don't like the idea of observing your thoughts, one of the things you can do is just concentrate on your breathing. So you just sit there for 5 minutes and just concentrate on your breath. That in itself is mindful because you're actually concentrating on one thing, which is breathing. And most meditation practices will very strongly focus on the breathing. So that's something you could try. And remember, 5 minutes. So if you're having trouble finding the time to meditate, as I've said to you, I every morning it's an hour. I meditate an hour. I love it. I find it's, obviously I wouldn't do it if I didn't think it was worthwhile. And people say, how do you find the time? I just make the time. I get up early, but that I'm not suggesting for any way. I'm not saying that you should do that, but 5 minutes, you will find that the research shows if you spend approximately 8 minutes a day meditating for 2 weeks, which isn't a huge ask, you will notice a significant change in your outlook, in your mindfulness, the way you react to things or the lack of reaction to things. That's all it takes. And so, yeah, it does have an enormous impact. Body scans a good thing to do, where you sit in a chair and you simply, or lie down on a mat, and you just simply scan your body from head to toe, and you look for any interesting tensions in your body. And of course, once you recognize those, you just relax those tensions. That's mindful. And you'll notice some very interesting things that you may not have ever noticed before, where the tensions are, how long they're there, how strong they are, all that kind of thing. So that's another very, very useful technique.
Sorry, Tim, I've got to go, but thank you.
No, you're right. We're just about done anyway. Thanks, Hattie.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thanks.
No, you're good. Thank you. I'm just about done. Another exercise, I'm just throwing some last minute things at you. The last thing, another one that you can do is just when the next time you've got a conversation with someone, is just practice being completely there. Be completely there and just see what that's like. That's something you can do without meditation. So just try that one. It's a simple exercise and just notice the difference it makes. And you know what's interesting? Notice the difference it makes on yourself, but also on the other person. You will be quite amazed at the difference. You know, I won't, just try it. You'll be amazed. I've given you some resources here just to end up. So when I send you out the slides this afternoon, if you're interested, there's some whole lot of bunch of resources there that you can go and read up on and listen to and what have you. Just thought I'd include those because I thought people might be interested. And the final message that I've got for you is the key is knowing what is going on for you. The key is being self-aware. If you can get that right, then you are being mindful by virtue of being self-aware, which is interesting. And the homework, of course, is to go away and try some things and see what you come up with. Anything you'd like to ask Patricia or Rebecca at this stage before we wrap up? All good?
No, not from me, Tim. No.
I've probably thrown a lot at you today, but I just, I just think, the key is to try some of those things at the end, and they're things you can do right now. You don't have to sort of trot down tools. The mindful listening one is hugely insightful. You'll find it's amazing because most of us think we're good listeners, but we're not really until we're completely there. So give that one a shot. All right. Thank you very much. Next time is next week. So I'll make sure I send you the right invitation this time. Okay. With the right time. All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Tim.
Catch you
Bye.
next time.
Bye.
Bye.